The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and quiet panic. Not the loud kind, not shouting, not chaos. The kind that settles into your bones when people are trying very hard not to lose control. A heart monitor beeped in short, uneven intervals. Too slow, then too fast, then slow again. Each sound carried a question no one wanted to ask out loud. On the stretcher lay an elderly man with a hollowed face and skin stretched thin over fragile bones. His chest rose shallowly, as if each breath had to be negotiated. A cracked plastic bracelet circled his wrist. The ink faded, the name barely legible. A few feet away, a young woman sat on the cold tile floor, her back pressed against a wall, knees drawn in as far as her pregnant belly allowed. One hand rested protectively over it. The other shook uncontrollably in her lap. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 23 years old, 8 months pregnant, and had exactly $9 left to her name. She hadn't planned to be here. No one ever did. A nurse hurried past, eyes focused straight ahead. A doctor murmured instructions that sounded calm, but weren't. Somewhere down the hall, a curtain swished open and closed. Emily swallowed hard, fighting the tightness in her throat. Her body felt heavy, not just from the pregnancy, but from exhaustion layered on top of hunger, layered on top of fear. "Please," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was speaking to. "Not today." Then the glass doors at the end of the corridor burst open. A man in a tailored charcoal suit rushed in, breath uneven, hair disheveled in a way that didn't match the price of the watch on his wrist. His shoes squeaked against the floor as he slowed, scanning the hallway wildly. When his eyes landed on the stretcher, something in him collapsed. He stopped moving. Then, without hesitation, he dropped to his knees beside the old man. "Dad," he said, the word breaking apart as it left his mouth. "Dad, I'm here." The nurses froze for half a second. Doctors exchanged quick looks. The corridor seemed to narrow around them. Emily watched from the floor, unnoticed. She didn't know who the man was. She didn't know that his name was Daniel Whitmore. She didn't know that he ran a multinational investment firm headquartered in Manhattan, with offices in Chicago, San Francisco, and Dallas. She didn't know that headlines had called him ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. All she knew was that a son was kneeling on the floor of a public hospital, begging his father not to die. And none of them knew how a starving stranger and a pregnant girl with $9 were already bound together. Before that moment, Emily's day had started the way most of her days did, quietly. The pale gray light of early morning slipped through the blinds of her small studio apartment on the edge of South Philadelphia, illuminating peeling paint and a thin mattress pressed against the wall. The radiator clanked once, then fell silent, as if even it was tired. Emily woke slowly, one hand already resting on her stomach. "Easy," she murmured, breathing through the familiar ache in her lower back. "I know." The baby shifted gently, a reminder that she wasn't alone, even when it felt like she was. There was no alarm clock, no phone buzzing with reminders. Her body had learned when it was time to get up. Hunger had become a kind of schedule. She swung her legs over the side of the mattress and sat for a moment, waiting for the dizziness to pass. Her vision blurred at the edges before settling. The room was small, bare. A folding table served as both kitchen counter and desk. A single chair leaned against the wall. A thrift store dress hung from the back of it, the nicest thing she owned. Emily crossed the room and opened a kitchen drawer. Inside sat a few coins, a folded receipt, and a crumpled $5 bill. She added them carefully on the table. $9. She stared at the money longer than she meant to. $9 meant groceries, if she was careful. $9 meant maybe 2 days. $9 meant she couldn't afford to make mistakes. She closed her eyes, letting out a slow breath. The father of her child had once promised her she wouldn't have to worry like this. He'd said all the right things, talked about moving in together, about the future. The day she told him she was pregnant, his voice had changed. 2 weeks later, he stopped answering her calls. Emily hadn't chased him. She didn't have the energy to beg someone to care. She washed her face at the sink, tied her hair back, and pulled on a worn hoodie. The mirror reflected a young woman who looked older than she should, eyes tired but steady. "Okay," she whispered to herself. One day at a time. Outside, the city was already awake. Buses hissed at stops. Delivery trucks rumbled past. Commuters moved quickly, heads down, coffee cups in hand. Philadelphia didn't wait for anyone. Emily walked a few blocks to the corner, where she sold fruit from a small folding stand she shared with 2 other vendors. It wasn't official. Nothing about her life was. She paid cash to whoever claimed authority that week and kept her head down. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed higher, and sweat clung uncomfortably to her skin. She arranged apples and oranges carefully, calling out softly to passers-by. Some ignored her. Some glanced at her belly and looked away. A few stopped and bought something, dropping bills into her hand without meeting her eyes. Around noon, her friend Maya Reynolds arrived, balancing a tray of wrapped sandwiches she sold to office workers. "You're looking pale," Maya said quietly as she set her tray down. "Have you eaten?" Emily shook her head. "Later." Maya frowned. "You keep saying that." "I will," Emily said, though they both knew it wasn't true. They worked side by side in silence for a while, the city flowing around them. Then Emily saw him. At first, she thought he was lost. The old man stood a few steps away from her stand, swaying slightly. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, worn and mismatched. His beard was untrimmed, his eyes sunken but alert. He stared at the fruit with a focus that made her chest tighten. He took a hesitant step forward. "Ma'am," he said softly, "could you spare a little food?" Before Emily could respond, a man walking past snapped, "Get out of the way," and waved him off without slowing down. The old man flinched, but didn't move. Maya leaned closer. "Don't," she whispered urgently. "Emily, you're pregnant. You don't know where he's been." Emily looked at the fruit, at the small stack of bills beside it. Then she looked at the man's hands. They were shaking. "I haven't eaten since yesterday," he said quietly. Something twisted in Emily's chest. She knew that feeling. The hollow ache, the lightheadedness, the way hunger made the world feel slightly unreal. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. $9. A voice in her head warned her to stop, to think, to be responsible. Another voice answered just as softly. "What if this is the last day he has?" Emily swallowed. "I am thinking about my baby," she said aloud, more to herself than to Maya. She reached for the money. The old man's eyes widened as she selected 2 apples, a banana, and a small bottle of water from a nearby vendor. She paid without counting the change. $9. "Gone. Sit," she said gently, pointing to the curb. "Eat slowly." The man stared at her as if she had handed him something priceless. "Thank you," he whispered, tears filling his eyes. "You didn't have to." "I know," Emily said. "Just eat." As he did, she noticed how carefully he chewed, as if afraid the food might disappear. When he finished, he wiped his mouth and looked at her belly. "When is the baby due?" he asked. "Soon," she replied. He nodded slowly. "Then I hope your child never knows hunger." The word stayed with her long after he shuffled away. That night, Emily went to bed hungry. The next morning, she collapsed. And now, she sat on the cold hospital floor, watching a man in a suit kneel beside his dying father. A doctor spoke quietly nearby. "We're doing everything we can." Daniel Whitmore didn't respond. He just held his father's hand. Emily closed her eyes briefly, her body trembling as a familiar pain tightened low in her abdomen. She didn't know it yet, but the choice she made with $9 had already set something irreversible in motion, and this was only the beginning. Emily woke to the sound of machines. Not alarms, not shouting, just a steady mechanical rhythm of something keeping time when her body couldn't. Her mouth was dry, her throat burned. When she tried to swallow, it felt like effort itself had weight. She opened her eyes slowly. White ceiling, harsh lights, a curtain pulled halfway around her bed. Hospital. Her first instinct was panic. Her hand moved immediately to her stomach. Still round, still heavy, still there. She exhaled shakily. A nurse noticed her stirring and stepped closer. "Easy," she said softly. "You fainted. Dehydration. Malnutrition." Emily tried to speak. Her voice came out weak. "My baby?" The nurse hesitated just long enough for Emily to notice. "The baby's under stress," she said carefully, "but there's still a heartbeat." Still. Emily closed her eyes, a tear slipping down the side of her face and into her hair. "I didn't mean for this," she whispered. I just helped someone." The nurse didn't answer. She adjusted the floor instead. Outside the curtain, Maya paced. She watched Emily collapse on the sidewalk, watched strangers hesitate before helping, watched time stretch into something dangerous. "I told her not to give it all away," Maya muttered to herself, guilt chewing at her chest. "I told her." Across the hospital, in a different wing, the old man lay alone on a narrow gurney. His breathing was shallow now. Each inhale sounded like it had to travel a long way to reach him. A nurse leaned over him. "Sir, do you have family?" He nodded faintly. "A son," he whispered. "Do you know his number?" His hand shook as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a phone, so cracked it barely held together. Back in the maternity ward, a doctor stepped into Emily's space. Dr. Thomas Reed, mid-40s, calm eyes, practiced restraint. "You're exhausted," he said. "Your body's been running on nothing." Emily stared at the ceiling. "I can't afford rest." Dr. Reed paused. "Your body doesn't negotiate." A contraction rolled through her suddenly. Sharp, unmistakable. Emily gasped, fingers curling into the sheets. Dr. Reed straightened instantly. "Okay," he said firmly. "Stay with me." Fear flooded her. "This is too early," she whispered. "It's too early." "We're going to stabilize you," he said. "But you need nutrition, fluids, time." Time. She didn't have time. She didn't have money. She didn't have anywhere to go. Meanwhile, in the emergency wing, the phone rang. Daniel Whitmore answered on the first ring. "Dad," he said, already standing. Silence. Then a voice. Weak. Familiar. "I'm at the hospital," the old man said. "If you still know where that is." Daniel didn't respond. He was already moving. Now he was here, kneeling beside the stretcher, holding a hand that felt smaller than he remembered. "I'm here," Daniel said. "I'm here." The doctor spoke quietly. "He's critical." Daniel nodded, jaw tight. Across the hall, Emily cried out again as pain twisted through her body. Two lives, breaking in parallel. Neither of them understood yet that this hospital wasn't just where things were falling apart. It was where accounts were about to be settled, and the cost would not be measured in money. Time inside the hospital moved differently. Minutes stretched until they felt like hours. Hours collapsed into something smaller, harder to measure. The clocks were present, but useless. No one trusted them. Emily lay still, afraid that any movement might trigger another wave of pain. Her body felt hollowed out, like it had given more than it had left to give. The 4 drip clicked softly beside her. each drop a reminder of how close she had come to losing control. Dr. Reed returned with a chart in his hand. "You're not in full labor," he said carefully, "but you're close enough that we can't ignore it." Emily stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means your body is choosing between survival and sacrifice," he replied. "And right now it's exhausted." She nodded slowly. She had felt that truth long before he said it. Outside her room, Maya sat with her arms crossed tightly, eyes red. She'd offered to call shelters, friends, anyone. There had been nothing useful to offer. Everyone had rules. Everyone had waiting lists. Everyone wanted paperwork Emily didn't have. In another corridor, Daniel Whitmore stood with his phone pressed his ear, his voice low and controlled. "Clear my schedule," he said. "Everything." A voice on the other end hesitated. "Sir, the board meeting." "Cancel it." Silence, then compliance. Daniel leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on the floor. For the first time in years, the decisions he made felt small. None of them could slow the uneven rise and fall of his father's chest. The old man drifted in and out of consciousness. At one point, his eyes opened and focused weakly on Daniel. "I was hungry," he murmured. Daniel froze. "What?" "Yesterday," his father continued, breath thin. "A girl, she gave me food." Daniel frowned slightly. "Where?" "Street," the old man said. "She was pregnant." The words landed heavier than they should have. Daniel didn't respond. He thought it was delirium, a side effect of pain. But something about the way his father said it stayed with him. Back in the maternity ward, a nurse brought Emily a cup of broth. "Drink," she said, slowly. Emily hesitated. "I don't have—" "It's covered," the nurse interrupted gently. "Just drink." Emily wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it to her lips. The first sip made her eyes close. Warmth spread through her chest, not just from the liquid, but from the relief of not having to calculate the cost of it. Tears slid down her cheeks without warning. "I'm sorry," she whispered, embarrassed. The nurse shook her head. "You're allowed to need help." Emily wasn't sure she believed that. A few hours later, a hospital administrator stopped Daniel near the nurse's station. "Sir," she said, cautious but respectful, "your father's been admitted without insurance information." Daniel didn't look at her. "Bill me." She hesitated. "There may be additional costs." Daniel finally turned, his expression calm but final. "I said bill me." The administrator nodded and stepped away. As she did, her eyes flicked briefly toward Emily's room. Daniel noticed. He followed her gaze. For a moment, he saw nothing but a young woman lying in a hospital bed, her face pale, her body still. Then he noticed the curve of her stomach. The floor, the chart at the foot of the bed. Something tightened in his chest. Not recognition. Not yet, just unease. Late that night, Emily woke to another contraction. This one was sharper, longer. She cried out softly, gripping the bed rail. Dr. Reed arrived quickly. His expression had shifted. "We need to prepare," he said, "just in case." Emily nodded, fear pooling in her stomach. Across the hall, Daniel sat beside his father, holding his hand as it grew colder. 2 rooms apart, 2 lives hanging in the balance, and a single act of kindness moving quietly between them, waiting for the moment it could no longer stay hidden. The hospital settled into its quietest hours just before dawn. Lights dimmed, voices softened, footsteps slowed. This was the hour when people either stabilized or didn't. Emily lay on her side, knees slightly bent, breathing carefully. Each breath felt deliberate, like it had to be earned. The contractions came and went, irregular but closer now, close enough that fear stayed awake, even when her body wanted to sleep. Dr. Reed stood at the foot of the bed, reading her chart in silence. "You're holding," he said finally. "Barely." Emily nodded. "That sounds right." He didn't smile. "If labor progresses, we intervene. If it doesn't, you'll need days of rest and nutrition." Days. Emily stared at the wall. Days meant rent. Days meant bills. Days meant questions she didn't have answers to. Outside her room, Maya sat with her head in her hands. The waiting room television murmured softly, a morning news segment, playing to no one in particular. The anchor talked about stock markets and traffic delays, her voice calm, detached. In another wing, Daniel watched his father sleep. Harold Whitmore's breathing had grown shallow again. The machines worked quietly, efficiently. They didn't panic. They didn't rush. They simply recorded what was happening. Daniel sat very still. He had spent his life believing that proximity to power meant protection, that if something went wrong, it would announce itself loudly. That danger came with warnings. This didn't. This was quiet, administrative, clinical. A nurse entered with a clipboard. "Mr. Whitmore, we need consent for a procedure if his condition deteriorates." Daniel took the pen without hesitation and signed. "Do you know if he has advance directives?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. He never planned to need them. The nurse nodded, unsurprised. As she turned to leave, Daniel asked, "Was there a pregnant woman admitted earlier? Dehydration." The nurse paused. "Yes, she's being monitored upstairs." "Is she okay?" The nurse hesitated again, the pause subtle but telling. "She's stable, but she came in malnourished. That complicates things." Daniel nodded slowly. "Thank you." When she left, Daniel leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Two people starving in the same city. One by choice, one by circumstance. And the world had treated them the same. Hours later, Harold's eyes opened again. "Daniel," he whispered. Daniel leaned forward immediately. "I'm here." Harold swallowed. "I shouldn't have stopped." Daniel frowned. "Stop what?" "Eating," Harold said. "Being seen." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Why?" Harold's gaze drifted to the window. "Because attention attracts men who don't need permission." Daniel's voice stayed calm. "Halstead." Harold closed his eyes. "Yes." Daniel waited. Silence stretched. Harold gathered strength the way a man gathers breath underwater. "He wanted access," Harold whispered. "Records. Structures. Names." Daniel listened. "I said no," Harold continued. He said no wasn't permanent. Daniel's fingers tightened around the chair arm. He said, Harold added, voice barely there, "that if I vanished, the pressure would move to you." Daniel exhaled slowly. "So you disappeared instead." Harold nodded faintly. "I thought if I removed myself, it would end." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He waited for the truth to finish arriving. "I didn't plan to starve," Harold said quietly. "I planned to hide." Daniel felt something cold and heavy settle into place. The hospital intercom chimed softly overhead. In the maternity ward, Emily cried out. This time, the pain didn't fade. Dr. Reed returned, joined by two nurses. Their movements were calm, but faster now. "We're moving you to labor and delivery," he said. Emily's eyes widened. "Now?" "Yes." Fear rose sharp and immediate. "I don't have anyone." Maya stood up instantly. "I'm here." Dr. Reed nodded. "Good." As they wheeled Emily down the hall, she caught a glimpse of Daniel standing near the elevator, speaking quietly into his phone. Their eyes met briefly. Emily looked away first. She didn't want to be seen like this. Weak, dependent, on the edge of something she couldn't control. Daniel watched her disappear into the elevator. Then he ended the call. "Vivian," he said quietly into the phone, "I need you in Philadelphia." There was no hesitation on the other end. "I'm already on my way." Daniel looked back at his father. "You protected me," Daniel said. "Now I'll finish it." Harold didn't open his eyes, but his grip tightened faintly around Daniel's fingers. The machines continued their steady rhythm. Upstairs, Emily screamed as labor claimed her body. Downstairs, paperwork began to move. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, a man named Grant Halstead slept comfortably, unaware that the silence protecting him was about to end. Morning arrived without ceremony. No sunlight through windows. No announcement. Just a subtle shift in the air, as if the hospital itself had decided the night was over. Emily screamed again. This time it wasn't fear. It was force. Her body had crossed a line without waiting for permission. "Okay," Dr. Reed said calmly, hands already in motion. "Stay with me. Don't fight it." Emily's vision blurred. Sweat soaked her hairline. Her grip tightened around the rails, knuckles white. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't do this." Maya leaned close, her voice shaking but steady. "You are. You already are." Emily cried out again as another contraction tore through her. Somewhere deep inside her, a quiet, terrifying thought surfaced. "If something goes wrong, there's no one to catch me." Downstairs, Daniel Whitmore signed another document. And another. And another. His handwriting stayed neat. Controlled. The pen never shook. Vivian Brooks stood beside him, reading over hospital forms, financial authorizations, patient advocacy requests. Everything she touched became official. Logged. Institutional. No gifts. No favors. No spectacle. Just systems doing what they were built to do, when someone knew how to guide them. "Emily Carter," Vivian said softly, reading from a file. "No insurance. No emergency contact. No dependent listed yet." Daniel didn't look up. "That changes." Vivian nodded once. "I'll need approval for a temporary medical trust. Quiet. Clean. Approved. And housing. Approved." Vivian paused. "Longer term?" Daniel finally looked at her. "Make it sustainable." Vivian's eyes sharpened slightly. "Understood." In the ICU, Harold Whitmore's breathing became irregular. The nurse noticed first. She adjusted the monitor, checked the 4, called for the doctor. Daniel stood immediately. "Sir," the nurse said carefully, "we need to prepare you." Daniel nodded. "I am." Harold's eyes fluttered open. "Daniel," he whispered. "I'm here." Harold swallowed. The girl. Daniel leaned in. "She's delivering." Harold's brow creased faintly. "Too early." "Yes." Harold exhaled slowly. "I didn't want this." Daniel's voice stayed steady. "I know." Harold's grip tightened weakly. "Don't let them erase her." Daniel felt something sharp and final settle into his chest. "They won't." Harold looked at him then, really looked, for the first time since waking. "Promise," he whispered. Daniel didn't hesitate. "I promise." Harold's eyes closed. The machine beeped once. Then again. A nurse moved quickly. A doctor stepped in. Instructions were given, calm and practiced. Daniel stepped back. He didn't pray. He didn't plead. He didn't raise his voice. He watched. Upstairs, Emily screamed one last time. Then everything stopped, for a second too long. The room went unnaturally quiet. Emily's chest heaved as she waited, terrified of what silence meant. Then, a sound, thin, sharp, alive. A baby's cry cut through the room. Emily sobbed openly, relief crashing through her body, so hard it hurt. "Oh, my God," Maya whispered. "Oh, my God." Dr. Reed moved with efficiency. "It's a boy," he said, small but breathing. Emily laughed and cried at the same time, exhausted beyond words. "They're taking him to the NICU," the nurse said gently, "just for monitoring." Emily nodded weakly. "Please," she whispered, "please be okay." Downstairs, the machine beside Harold Whitmore flattened into a single, unwavering tone. The doctor stepped back slowly. Time passed. Then the doctor turned to Daniel. "I'm sorry," he said. Daniel didn't move. The nurse gently reached for Harold's wrist, checking what they already knew. Daniel stood very still. He looked at his father's face. Calm now, empty of tension, finally resting. A man who had starved himself into disappearance. A man who believed erasure was protection. Daniel exhaled once. Not grief. Resolve. Vivian appeared beside him moments later, already aware. She didn't offer condolences. She knew better. "He's gone," Daniel said quietly. "Yes," Vivian replied. Daniel looked at his watch. "Time of death." She told him. Daniel nodded. "Document everything." Vivian's eyes met his. "And Halstead?" Daniel's voice remained level. "Now we begin." Upstairs, Emily lay trembling, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know that the man she saved was dead. She didn't know that her child's birth and his death had crossed paths in the same building. She didn't know that the systems moving quietly around her were no longer neutral. They were aligning. And somewhere, Grant Halstead's name was about to enter files he didn't know existed. The hospital did not mourn. Paperwork moved. Beds were cleaned. Schedules adjusted. A man died. A child was born. And the building absorbed both without pause. Emily woke to sunlight she didn't remember asking for. It filtered through the blinds in thin, careful lines. Touching the edge of her bed, her hand, the pale blanket pulled up to her chest. For a moment, she didn't move. She lay still, listening. No pain, no alarms, just the faint hum of a machine somewhere far away. Then she remembered. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. Flat. Panic flared, sharp and immediate, until the door opened. "He's okay," the nurse said softly, as if she'd been trained to recognize fear before it spoke. "Your son is in the NICU. He's small, but he's breathing on his own." Emily exhaled so hard her chest hurt. "Can I see him?" "In a little while," the nurse replied. "You need rest first." Emily nodded weakly, tears slipping down her temples into her hair. Across the city, a private jet waited on the tarmac, engines idling, paperwork already filed. There would be no press release, no public announcement, no dramatic funeral. Harold Whitmore was buried quietly in a small cemetery outside Boston 2 days later, under his real name. Only 3 people attended. Daniel Whitmore stood without an umbrella as rain soaked into his coat. Vivian Brooks remained beside him, composed, watchful. No speeches were given, no regrets spoken aloud. When it was over, Daniel didn't linger. Grief was not something he needed to perform. Back in Philadelphia, Emily was discharged into a different world than the one she'd entered. A social worker met her before she left. Calm, efficient, no pity in her eyes. "You'll be staying temporarily at a furnished apartment near Rittenhouse Square," the woman explained. "Medical care is arranged. Groceries delivered weekly. Utilities covered." Emily stared. "I didn't apply for—" "This isn't charity," the woman said gently. "It's support." Emily frowned. "From who?" The woman smiled politely. "From someone who believes you shouldn't be punished for doing the right thing." Emily didn't argue. She didn't know how. 3 weeks later, Emily stood beside a clear plastic bassinet, watching her son sleep. His name was Noah. He weighed just over 5 pounds now. Still small, still fragile, but alive. A nurse adjusted the monitor and stepped back. "He's strong," she said. "You did well." Emily nodded, though she didn't feel strong. She felt changed, like something inside her had closed quietly and locked. That afternoon, Daniel Whitmore arrived. No suit this time, just a dark coat, clean shoes, no entourage. He stood in the doorway until Emily noticed him. She stiffened immediately. "I didn't ask for this," she said quickly. "I don't want." Daniel raised a hand slightly, stopping her without force. "I know." Emily studied him, cautious. "Then why are you here?" Daniel walked closer, stopping at a respectful distance. He looked at the baby, then back at her. "My father died," he said. Emily's breath caught. I'm sorry." Daniel nodded once. "He kept your receipt." Emily blinked. "What?" "The one from the corner store." Daniel continued calmly. "He carried it with him." Emily's throat tightened. "I didn't mean for it to matter." "It mattered to him," Daniel said, "and it matters now." Emily shook her head slightly. "I don't want anything from this." Daniel didn't argue. He simply said, "You already gave." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "You won't see me often. You won't owe me anything. Your life will be your own." Emily searched his face. "Why?" Daniel answered honestly. "Because the world punishes kindness quietly, and that's unacceptable." Emily looked down at Noah, then back up. "Is this going to disappear?" Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "No." Emily nodded slowly. She didn't thank him. She didn't cry. She simply accepted the truth as it stood. Daniel left without ceremony. 6 months later, Grant Halstead sat in a glass-walled conference room in Manhattan, reviewing documents that didn't make sense yet. A regulatory inquiry, an audit, a restructuring freeze. His assistant spoke carefully. His lawyers frowned more than usual. Nothing dramatic happened that day. No arrest, no headlines, just pressure, quiet, administrative, precise. By the time Grant realized what was happening, it was already irreversible. Emily never heard his name. She didn't need to. 1 year later, Emily pushed Noah's stroller through a park in Center City, autumn leaves crunching beneath her shoes. She worked part-time at a nonprofit now. She had stability, time, a future she didn't have to calculate every second. Sometimes she thought about the old man, about the way his hands shook, about the $9. She never knew what consequences unfolded because of it, and that was the point. Because real justice doesn't announce itself. It corrects the world quietly and then moves on.